Hello! Welcome once again to the Rotten Horror Picture Show, the horror movie podcast where we talk about films off the Rotten Tomatoes 200 Best Horror Movies. You know how radio hosts say things weird? I'm starting to learn that it's just because they say the same thing over and over so many times they have to make it interesting for themselves. So like they get that like William Shatner thing where they pause and
you get like a wacky stereotypical shock jock voice.
Yeah, or you like emphasize different words in the sentence.
The emphasis on the wrong syllable.
Yeah, I think it's just because you got to keep it interesting. Anyway, we're keeping it interesting today.
Google gobble, Google gobble,
countdown.
one of us.
We are taking it all the way back to 1932 with Tod Browning's Freaks, which is number 36 on our list. 95% Rotten Tomato score.
Damn.
88% audience score. If Tod Browning could see that,
Yeah.
he would probably come back to life.
Yeah.
Had you seen this before?
No, but I feel like I have.
Okay. Go on.
I have read so much about it.
Okay.
It sort of is a legendary movie.
Yes.
If you are a horror movie fan.
It is, yes.
So I feel like I encountered bits and pieces of it and images of it and people writing about it, whether it's in that David Scull book.
The horror show.
Yes.
Excellent book. Highly recommend.
Or even like on Reddit and all of that, people just waxing rhapsodic about this movie.
I had seen this, I want to say twice before, but probably only once. This was one that I actually put off watching for a long time because I honestly wasn't sure. I had also heard a lot about it. And so I wasn't sure what it was going to be like.
Yeah.
And I was a little bit hesitant because, frankly, I thought I was going to be freaked out by it.
See, I was worried it was going to be so dated as to be deeply offensive and not in like an interesting way.
Yeah, I would like to say my reasons were more as altruistic as that, but it's just that I was kind of weirded out by the whole thing. Because, I'd seen stills. And, as a young person in the 20th century, not really things you see very often.
Yeah.
At least not as much as you did on the boardwalk at Coney Island back in the 30s.
You didn't have a chicken woman living down the street from you?
No. Well...
I was going to say, are you sure we grew up in the same town?
We had a chicken woman, but it was a little bit... She was shaped like a chicken, kind of.
Fair.
Skinny legs, kind of heavy on top.
Yep.
Just would not stop clucking at the children going past her lawn. So yeah, I watched this, and it was one where when I finally watched it, I was like, oh, this is not what I expected. It was what I expected, but also very much not what I expected.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. And I think as we both have learned about this movie over the years, I think there's a lot of stuff about the reaction to it at the time that is just as interesting as the movie itself.
Yes.
Which is nice because the movie is 65 minutes long.
Right. Yeah.
And we need things to talk about. So we're going to take a quick break, play the trailer. I don't even know if this has a trailer, honestly. I'll find something.
Yeah, we'll find something.
And we'll come back and talk about Freaks.
A loving cup. They're going to make you one of them, my peacock. Go, 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 go.
Okay. Tod Browning's Freaks, directed by Tod Browning. Written by Willis Goldbeck and Leon Gordon. Suggested by, that's one of my favorite old-timey credits, is the suggested by credit.
Yes.
Which is like, it's like this guy, it says suggested by the story Spurs by Todd Robbins, but suggested always sounded to me like Todd Robbins walked by and went, hey, what if they're freaks?
Yeah. You should make a movie about circus performers.
Yeah.
And then you just walk away.
That's a great suggestion, Todd. Thank you. Starring Wallace Ford, Layla Hyams, Olga Baklanova, Roscoe Ates, or Addis, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, Henry Victor, Harry Earls, Daisy Earls, a pinhead named Schultz, and the master of Bartertown himself, Angelo Rossito as Angelino. Amanda,
Yes, Clay.
what happens in Tod Browning's Freaks?
Beautiful trapeze artist Cleopatra sets her sights on fellow circus performer Hans, but she is only interested in his inheritance, and with her lover Hercules, the circus's strongman, she plans to kill Hans for it. But unknown to Cleopatra and Hercules, the other circus performers discover their plans and prepare to do whatever they must to protect their friend.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happens, Clay.
This movie proves that not all blonde women are evil.
Yeah, not all of them.
At least 50% of them are good.
Well, Clay, some things you'll find in Tod Browning's Freaks include
Mm-hmm.
lots of lines learned phonetically.
Yes. Continue. I assume, based on the
Yes.
way some of these lines were delivered, I'm going to say these actors were not speaking English outside of the action call in this movie.
Probably not in some cases. Gender inclusive gold digging.
Which is really the best kind that you can hope for.
Yeah, and it's nice. It's kind of progressive. Like,
Yeah.
it's both men and women are both gold diggers in this. A pretty average looking strong man.
Yeah, it's like, you ever see the like the Mr. Universe pictures from the early days? And it's
Yeah.
like, this guy looks like my gym teacher.
Yes.
Yeah. Like
Yes.
Sean Connery won Mr. Universe Scotland.
Right.
And he was like the best, most muscly guy in Scotland.
Yes, that
which
was
is
the
like,
buffest bod that Scotland had ever seen to
yeah.
that point.
And then he immediately left.
Yeah. Good for him.
Mm-hmm. That's what my my girlfriend learned. She loves Sean Connery. She did a semester abroad in Scotland. She had planned, her whole plan was she was going to go there, love it, move there, assuming all the men are just Sean Connery clones. And she got there, and what she took away is that they are not.
I think that's a safe conclusion to have reached.
They're all probably very wonderful people, but they're not all
But
Sean
they're
Connery.
not all Sean Connery.
She said, I think the attractive people all become famous. So they all leave.
Ouch.
We love you, Scotland.
Froso the Clown's mysterious operation.
Yeah. What was that?
You should have caught me before my operation, Clay.
Yeah. So one of the really interesting aspects about this movie is it's from 1932, which is a pre-code movie. But this is probably a big reason. I don't know this for sure, but it's probably a big reason why they started the Hays Code, is movies like this, where you could do shit like this.
Yeah.
And as long as you kept the entendre doubled,
Yes.
you could get away with it.
Yes, you can have a sneaky little throwaway line in there that implies a lot.
Yeah, I didn't
but
know
doesn't
if
confirm
he was like
anything.
castrated or something.
We
or...
can talk about it later. Yeah. A charter member of the Lollipop Guild.
Yes. How could you be so insensitive, Amanda?
Because you told me to say
It's
that.
true. He, Harry Earls, who plays Hans, is one of the Munchkins. Actually, his sister is as well.
Oh.
And he is one of the Three Lollipop Guild guys.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm glad he continued to get work.
He did. I guess his whole family, which was him, I think he had two sisters, they stopped doing movies, I think, around this time or shortly after. And then they came back to do The Wizard of Oz. And then after that, they spent most of their life doing Barnum and Bailey circus stuff.
Oh, okay.
He lived to be in his 80s.
Yeah, didn't he die like in the 2000s or something insane?
Yeah, something like that, which is crazy.
Good for Hans. Lots of talk of figures.
Well, it's a business.
Look at your figure in that dress, Clay.
Oh, that kind of figure. I thought you meant like money.
No, they call like a woman's figure. Like there are multiple men in this movie that call it a figure.
Yeah.
The OG big suit.
Yes.
This is where David Byrne must have gotten his inspiration.
Yeah, it's too bad there wasn't a mallet to the head spot in Stop Making Sense. That would have been fun.
And last but certainly not least, a loving cup.
Yes. The grossest kind? Best kind?
I mean, in a post-COVID world,
Yeah.
grossest kind, unfortunately.
Yeah. It is the kindest kind.
The most loving kind.
Most inclusive kind.
Yes.
You become one of them or one of us.
On a microbiological level.
Okay, so Tod Browning's Freaks, 1932. Tod Browning directed Dracula, which was very successful. Mm-hmm. And this was his follow-up to Dracula. MGM came to him and said, Todd, we want something scarier than Frankenstein. Oh. You can do whatever you want.
Oh, boy.
And Tod Browning is a circus boy. Mm-hmm. He literally ran away from home and joined the circus when he was a kid. So the circus and circus culture was part of his blood. And so he decided to make this movie. And basically everybody in 1932 thought it was awful.
I just have to say, I love that MGM was pretty much like, make something scarier than Frankenstein, if that can be done. Mm-hmm. And Tod Browning pretty much said, hold my beer.
Yeah,
and went out and did something that MGM subsequently regretted.
Yeah, so that's the not to just jump into the post movie making thing or the stuff around it, but that's the most interesting thing about it, because this is not what I would call a scary movie. The final sequence, excellent.
Yes.
Very, very creepy.
Yeah.
But for the most part, this is just kind of like a drama.
Yeah.
And they go out of their way to be very, I think, respectful to showing the circus performers as a community of people who are like a family, and why it's so awful to look at them as less than.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, the people making the movies did not take that message away from it.
Yeah, no.
People watching the movie did not take that message away from it. And it was labeled as exploitative. Almond. Anyway.
Yeah, it's so this movie is really interesting structurally, because it starts with this framing device of the carnival barker drawing in some crowds to look at this something, a creature, a woman, whatever, in a pit, and you don't see it right away, and you don't really know what is going on, and then it flashes back, and it starts with her, Cleopatra, on the trapeze, and then we from there get the whole drama of all the interpersonal relationships happening in this traveling carnival, and it spends a long time on those interpersonal relationships. Like
it tells you how horny and incestuous this circus is.
Yeah, but in kind of a great way.
Oh yeah.
Like it's, you're getting all of the performers introduced as this goes on, even the ones who aren't explicitly named, who are just sort of like background characters. And the film is definitely doing this on purpose. Like it's bringing you through and putting these people who look different than the average person in front of you. But the movie's not like, there's no like musical sting.
Right.
Like when Johnny Eck comes on, who is, he has no lower half. There's no like dun 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 when you see him, and he's not introduced in a way that's frightening. He's just, they're like, oh hey Johnny, what's up? And he's like, oh hey, how you doing? How's the performance tonight? Like, it's very normal. It's just like, yeah, this is my neighbor and coworker Johnny.
Right.
And it's I think you're right that it's pretty sensitive. It introduces them as people first and foremost, and it highlights the relationships between them. Like, these two were dating and then they broke up. These two were married and they just had a baby. These two are engaged. These two hate each other. These two are friends. Like, you get to see the sort of like social web amongst everybody before it turns into the more classic kind of like horror moment towards the end.
Yeah, and I think that Tod Browning pulled a fast one a bit with this movie. I think he made a movie that was a tribute to a culture he really loved.
Yeah.
And draped it with the or covered that cake with the frosting of horror movie trappings.
Sounds like a delicious cake.
I know, it might taste like dirt. But you know what I mean, because it's like, because you've got the opening scene. He's using a lot of. He opens the movie like a carnival sideshow, which is to draw, because you think, okay, horror movie. You're coming into the. Let me try and compose myself here. The very concept of this movie is playing off the abnormalities of the circus performers as something that is horrific. And once you go in thinking that's what you're getting. And when you sit down, the first thing you get is very much a Carnival Barker kind of like drawing you in.
Yes.
And then once you get into it, that's when he kind of flips the script and presents you with a pretty even-handed, for the most part, sensitive, just kind of almost documentary about these people, what they do, how they live their lives. I thought that one of the more interesting things was that he takes the time to push in on a lot of these performers doing their things. Yeah. To show like the guy who doesn't have arms and legs lighting the cigarette. Apparently there was a longer scene where he actually rolled the cigarette too. Yeah. Yeah. The woman who's eating with her foot because she doesn't have arms. Yeah. So the sword swallower, you get that full frame. You know, he's showing this stuff off. Right. And the stuff that he's pushing in on isn't I'm just going to use the term geek because I don't know what else to use. Pushing in on the geeks and like their drooling mouths or like their horrible faces. He's pushing in on the amazing things that they can do.
Yeah, and it's treated as more just like, especially the stuff about, you know, the man who's no legs and no arms rolling his cigarette, lighting his cigarette, or the woman drinking with her feet. These things aren't. The camera lingers on them so that you can see them, but they're not presented in a moment of performance to an audience.
Right. Yes.
Like we're seeing the performers off stage. We never see a full performance. You know, we don't see them out in the circus ring with an audience and people clapping or jeering.
Or in the freak show. Setup. Yeah.
Right. We don't see them like that. We see them in their homes. We see them in, you know, maybe rehearsals or like Froso working on his different bits.
Yeah.
You know,
that bathtub bit. Excellent.
Right. Yeah. And so it's
I don't even know what the joke, like in execution of like the circus, that joke is supposed to be, but in the movie,
no idea.
Excellent bit.
But yeah, I do think you're right that Tod Browning kind of pulls this bait and switch where you're getting at the very beginning the freak show setting. And then it doesn't actually show you anything, and it brings you backstage and back into their lives and shows these people just living. Yeah. And I think it goes a long way too to point out that you very easily could have ended this movie on the reveal of the fate of Cleopatra as like the horror movie sting to leave you with. Yeah. But that's not the last scene. The final scene is Hans in a 3-piece suit in a mansion. Yes. Just living a normal life. Right. He's gotten his inheritance.
Yeah.
You know, he's filthy rich. He's got a butler. Like he's living beyond a normal life. He's living an extremely successful, wealthy person's life.
I thought that scene at the end was a little bit hammy because I was like, do we really need? Because in my mind I was like, it's so much more impactful to end on the chicken lady. But then I was thinking about it, I was like, oh, okay, but yeah, the point is, not, like even in this moment, he's going out of his way to not emphasize the horror aspect. Right. As much as he's emphasizing the humanizing of people who are viewed as monstrous.
Yeah, and I think in a way this movie is much more of a love story than it is a horror movie, because Hans and Frida are sort of like actually a loving couple. Like she clearly loves Hans so much, and like I spent half this movie just being so upset for Frida. Like she is so long suffering and just like tries to her whole thing is that she's willing to let him go if it means he'll be happy, even if it breaks her heart. And so for me, I'm like, by the time you get to that end, when she comes, that Venus and Feroso bring her to see Hans again, and they sort of reunite. I was like, yay!
She knew it was coming, though. You saw what happened when everybody on the Earth saw that giant vampire lady from Resident Evil. Everybody was like, "Oh, I want giant mommy woman, please hug me to your huge bosom." That's
what is happening.
You don't remember that? Was Resident Evil one of the in the last 10 years or something? There was that one Resident Evil.
Stroke.
You know what I'm talking about. You don't know what I'm talking about?
I have no idea.
It was a sensation. There's a Resident Evil game that came out that had this vampire lady who was 7 feet tall and equally proportioned. Let's put it that way.
Sounds great.
And she became the evil mommy of the internet for a year.
How did I miss this?
I don't know. This feels like it was right up your alley.
Yeah,
I'm surprised you missed it.
I
My point is,
some research to do, I guess.
Point is, everybody wants to be hugged by a giant woman, is what I'm saying. But yeah, it is so, they go out of for a movie made at a time where people where the scripts tend to tell you what they're trying to say a lot of the times. I thought it was really, what's the word I'm looking for? Subtly handled to have Hans never really talk about how Cleopatra being into him is something that would make him feel normal. Unless he does. Does he talk about that?
I don't think he talks about it that explicitly. He definitely talks about sort of the inverse of being made to feel abnormal, even though on the inside he says, I'm just a man. I have the same feelings as any man. And people look at me and they don't see that. They don't understand that. So he talks about sort of the inverse of having his outward appearance preclude anybody thinking of him as a full, autonomous, intelligent adult man with emotional and sexual needs of an adult man. And
having Cleopatra be into him is a way to outwardly show that, or at least that's what he thinks anyway.
Yeah, I mean, she definitely seems sort of like this unattainable ideal to him that has somehow turned out to be attainable. And so it's the seduction of that, of having your sort of wildest fantasy, it's come true.
Yeah.
That it makes it, because Hans in this seems like a fairly reasonable guy, and it can be kind of surprising that he doesn't see through Cleopatra at all for so long. It takes until their wedding night for him to register.
He's been poisoned.
He's been poisoned, and she's been horrible, openly horrible. And the thing was, she wasn't great before that.
Right. Yeah.
There's the scene where they're kind of in the ring during an off time, and there are the three guys at the card table who are mocking Hans, and then she sort of starts playing up and gets in on the joke against him, and he doesn't. He sort of refuses to acknowledge that she's also laughing at him.
Yeah.
And I really do think it's just that he's totally blinded by this complete fantasy come to life for him, that he wants to believe that it's true so badly that he's willing to ignore any of the red flags, and she has a lot of red flags.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if this were a longer movie, and we can get into why it isn't in a little bit. I think there's probably room for, it's one of those things where you could do, but I don't think you don't need it. Where I think there's room for Hans to actually, as he perceives himself getting closer to Cleopatra, he starts to actively reject the circus family because he's part of the cool crew now. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think maybe part of the reason they don't do that in this movie, I don't know if it's just for time's sake, but I think also it's a little bit to show that Hans is genuine.
Sure.
You know, his affections for people and his friendships are dear to him, and he's not going to be totally blinded.
That is true.
Yeah.
Because the way that this whole thing plays out, which is what causes the explosion on her part, is not that Hans is distancing himself and thinking him to be a normal person.
Yes.
It's that he's like, great, you are one of us now.
Right. You're joining my family.
Yeah.
This is my family. Now that we're married, you're part of my family.
Yeah, she expresses her disgust of all of the circus performers pretty clearly.
Yes.
And so to get to that point where he's like, yeah, now you're part of that.
Yeah.
There's nothing less appealing to her.
Right. And then at the very end, he sort of says in this moment of remorse in that last scene, I think, where he said, I just wanted to take the poison from her to have the proof, and I wanted it to end there. So he didn't want her punishment to be as extreme as it was. So I do think like a big part of this movie is showing that it's the sort of inner versus outer beauty thing where, you know, Cleopatra is gorgeous and looks perfect, but she is rotten to the core.
Yeah.
And Hans doesn't look traditionally attractive, but he's a good soul.
Yeah.
And I think this movie is really striving to highlight that, you know, these people, regardless of how you feel about how they look, are good people.
Yeah. Versus
the ones who are traditionally the more attractive ones being actually the ones who suck.
Yeah. It is so interesting how they choose to undercut things that in order to maintain this idea of these people being nothing more than people. The most notable instance for me is being where the caretaker finds the circus people frolicking in the private forest.
Yes.
And goes and gets the guy who owns the place, and he's like, there's some freaky people out here doing some freaky shit.
Yeah.
And then they come over and they're like, oh no, we don't get much sun, we're just out here. And he's like,
I wanted to take the children out to play.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And where normally in a movie like this it would be met with scorn and horror, the guy's like, oh yeah, great.
Yeah.
Stay as long as you want. Yeah, I'll see you later.
Yeah, I like that though. I like that this movie isn't going for the simplistic, like the quote unquote big people or quote unquote normal people are all bad inside. And then the people who are more non-traditional appearing, shall we say, are all universally good. This is going to be a very
euphemism.
I know
podcast.
It is. I can't help it. But I like that. Like I like that there are characters like the guy who owns the park and Froso and Venus, who I don't know what Froso's operation was all about, but it does not outwardly change the fact that he presents as a non-disabled person.
Yep.
And he's still a good guy. So I like that the movie kind of lets you see that it's not kind of drawing this black and white line of like us versus them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Froso's a very interesting character because...
He's such a weird character. He's great, but he's weird.
Well, all the men in this movie suffer from 1930s male character disease, which means basically anytime a woman asks them to do something, they react like they're going to smack her in the face. And it's this thing where like, it's this weird noir sensibility masculinity thing that is also kind of played for laughs, where it's like it's almost like someone doing it who doesn't understand where the joke is, because they are right on the line. What I'm seeing is, I know I can't find the words. What I'm seeing is they're trying to do that thing from the movies of this time where the guy is basically negging the girl.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be kind of funny and charming, and he's kind of like a tough guy.
Flirting, but it's mean.
Yeah. But here, it's very close to the line of just being like, these guys are all shitty.
Right. But it's also it's just a little confusing. There's that whole first exchange between Froso and Venus when she has broken up with the strongman and has gathered her stuff and moved out of his trailer and back into her own.
Haven't you ever seen a woman move before?
It's just a great line.
That whole scene was fantastic.
But so she kind of unloads on Froso, and he seems like, what is happening?
Yeah.
What? And then when she leaves, he sort of has this, wait, I should be offended.
Yes.
And then he's, hey, wait a minute. And then he follows her back into her place. And she tries to apologize, but he still kind of does the, like, being really hard on her. Mm-hmm. But every time she kind of cries or says something that's maybe not what he would have expected, he's a little bit like, well, I mean, you're not so bad.
Yeah. At one point he says to her, you ought to be happy an awful guy wanted you.
I like the line, you ought to take yourself for a tumble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, he's an interesting guy because I did not expect him to be as much of a part of this movie as he was.
Yeah, and he ends up kind of having his big macho man moment at the end where he saves Venus from Hercules and beats him up, and it's very unexpected from the character that you are introduced to with the clown face paint.
Yeah. He's I figured it was just going to be that one scene outside and that it was just going to be a gag. Yeah. But it was fun to see him stick around because I liked him.
Yeah, I did too.
And I like the stuff with him and Venus as well. I was trying to in the beginning with the carnival barker scene. Mm-hmm. I like how he says that she was once beautiful, blah 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 blah, and then the thing starts going. Yeah. And they present you with two women who are kind of identical looking,
very similar looking.
And I don't know if that's in an attempt to make you wonder which one is the one who ends up deformed or what, but I found myself thinking, I was like, what's the point of Venus? What's she doing? And then as it played, I was like, okay, this actually works. Yeah. Because it's really presenting two sides of the coin here. Yeah. Venus and Froso are performers who are, and Venus is the more interesting one because she is someone who has been brought into this by the strongman, whose name I can't remember. Hercules, of course.
Yeah, very on the nose.
And she's like, she says, I wouldn't even be here if you didn't, if I didn't follow you here. But by the end of the movie, she's happy to be there. Like she falls in love with Froso. It's like part of the family. Whereas Venus,
she's got friends. Like she and Frida are clearly very close. They're often off, kind of just the two of them chatting. Yeah. And she's, they're confidants. And she seems very, very accepted and very accepting of the carnival community. Yeah. Whereas Hercules clearly thinks he's above everybody.
Yeah, I think of all the characters in this who could have used a little bit more time, I think Hercules, because I understand he's a dickhead, but it doesn't go much deeper than that. Like,
I don't know if he has to, though. I think fair. Having him be all brawn, no brains is kind of the point, is that he is just like shallow and materialistic, and he gets with Cleopatra because she's hot. And doesn't really care about the rest. And Cleopatra's the one who comes up with the scheme. And he just says, yeah, sounds great. Yeah. So I don't know. I see what you're saying, but I also feel like there's not much more there. Yeah. For him anyway.
I think the thing that I'm struggling with a little bit is that, again, 65 minutes, very short. Yeah. It could be longer, but I think I agree with you that I don't think it needs to be. Yeah. I think it tells the story pretty tightly. Yeah. And there's not a lot of fat on it. The original cut was 90 minutes. And the head of MGM was so horrified when he watched the first cut that they trimmed out, unbeknownst to Tod Browning, cut half an hour out of the movie.
Oh, my God.
Which is now, unfortunately, seems to be lost footage.
Oh, that sucks.
And it sounds like, from everything I've seen, that the stuff they cut is almost exclusively from the ending.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, apparently, I at least that's the only stuff that I've seen explicitly mentioned.
Yeah.
Is the ending was longer, that final sequence was longer.
I mean, that's if it was a 90-minute movie and you cut 30 minutes of it, that means you took out a third of the film.
Yeah,
That's
I can't
huge.
imagine that scene goes on for half an hour. But they cut some more. You find out what happens to Hercules at the end, where he's part of the freak show now. He's been castrated,
Yeah.
and he's singing castrati. But yeah, so this ending sequence seems to be and rightfully so. Honestly, it's the one horror movie part of the movie.
Yes.
And again, I think Tod Browning uses this movie and the trappings that he's playing with to his advantage, because that sequence at the end is legitimately awesome.
Yeah.
Like once, when you've got the guys like staring at them through the bottom of the stair, like
Yes.
the whole movie could have been that.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
he saves that for righteous vengeance.
Yes, because instead of looking at them as creatures who are preying upon humans, instead you're looking at people who are protecting and getting revenge for their friend. It kind of it switches your sympathies to where they belong.
Yeah.
Like, because it is genuinely disturbing when you see the rain and the mud and these people coming out from under and behind the carriages with weapons, and they're not running, they're not charging, there's nothing like, there's no crime of passion moment here for them.
Yeah.
They are slowly and unstoppably approaching Hercules and Cleopatra. And it's that, like, I think that pace is one of the scariest parts.
Yeah.
Is that they're not in any rush. They're not screaming and running at them. They are just like very steadily making their way. And then you never really see what happens in the moment where they get caught.
Yeah.
Which is also very frightening.
Yeah, to this day, I've seen the image of the chicken lady many times. I have no idea what they did to her. Like, I guess they cut her legs off. Like, it's very disturbing.
It's extremely, when you think about it, if you think about it from any sort of realistic point of view, like if this was happening in real life, like they horrendously mutilated that woman.
Yeah. If she probably wouldn't have survived that, honestly.
Right. Yeah. But the
yeah.
other scary thing about what happens to Cleopatra is that when you finally see her, and it's been withheld from you for the whole movie, like I think you can figure out pretty early on, pretty quickly, that it's her. Because it cuts directly from that beginning carnival barker to her.
Yeah.
And he says something like, she was called the Jewel of the Sky or something like that, and she's a trapeze artist. So you're waiting. You sort of know she gets her comeuppance the whole movie, and you're waiting to see her. And it's that delayed suspense of like knowing you're gonna see it at the end. And it's in the back of your head through the whole movie of like, yeah, but what did they do to her? Like, what happened to her? What did they do to her? And then when you finally see her, not only is she so physically changed and so physically upsetting to look at, she just squawks.
Yes. Yeah.
Like they've broken her brain too. Yeah. She's just ruined in every sense of the word. And she's kind of the only one now who is truly subhuman. Whereas the other performers, again, we've spent all this time seeing them have friendships and relationships and go about their daily lives. I don't think Cleopatra, once she's the chicken woman, is having friendships and relationships. No. No. I don't think that's available to her
Probably
anymore.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that final sequence, I don't know what Tod Browning learned between Dracula and this, but that final sequence in this is more exciting than anything in Dracula.
Fair.
Dracula is
I love Dracula, but
I
that's
love Dracula
fair.
too, but it's a pretty stilted movie.
Yeah.
It's I think it was his first picture with sound. And Dracula is shot like a silent film.
Yes.
it doesn't. Whereas this feels a little bit more comfortable with the sound element and where to put the camera and pushing it in certain places.
Yeah.
But especially that final sequence in the rain, where you've got the moving caravan, the rain coming down, the mud, the lightning. You've got two different things going on with Hercules and fighting Frozzo inside the cart, and then you've got them chasing Cleopatra. That's so much more complex than anything in Dracula.
Yeah.
Like the action in Dracula amounts to, instead of slowly walking upstairs, they quickly walk upstairs. You know, it's very stilted. It's very deliberate. Whereas this has a lot more energy to it.
Yeah. Can I also just say, I love right before that whole scene really kicks off, when Cleopatra is trying to administer another dose of poison to Hans, and she says, "Oh, it's time for your friends to go." And he's like, "No, I like them here." And she's like, "Well, I have to give you your medicine." And she kind of turns around, and when she turns back, they've all, like, one of them just pulls out a switchblade and casually starts wiping it down.
Yep.
And then the other guy pulls a gun out of his jacket and casually starts wiping it
I will
down.
say, I found that objectively hilarious.
I loved
when
it.
they all just pull out weapons, and like
Oh
the
my
guy,
God, so casual about
the
it.
guy without the legs and the arms has the knife in his teeth.
Yes.
And even one of the I don't know what the pinheads,
Microcephalic, yeah.
pardon my dated speech.
Yes.
It just has like a tiny little axe.
Yeah.
It's like this feels like in The Simpsons when Mr. Burns gets shot, and before he gets shot, they cut to everybody has the weapon with them.
Yeah.
Where it's like Apu's got a gun and
Yep.
Skinner's got a hand grenade.
Yep. Someone's got a shotgun.
Yeah.
And someone's
Like,
got a
at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still pretty creepy. At the time, I bet it was very creepy, but like it's kind of funny.
Oh
Like,
yeah. No, part of the reason I love it is that it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
Because it's just so like, and it's a familiar. It's funny and it's familiar because I think other media, like movies and TV, have copied it from this. Do you know what I mean? Like this
Sure,
is one of those
yes.
movies that I think, because of its like later cult status, worked its way into lots of other pop culture things. And we just sort of grew up with the references baked into stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, like Greg was saying earlier, it was in like the Clerks
Yep,
cartoon,
the One of Us
or
thing,
something.
yes.
Yeah, so it's just it's interesting where it has popped up,
Yeah.
and the ways in which you can watch. That's kind of why I said, like, I didn't see this movie before, but I felt like I did,
Right.
because a lot of this becomes horror movie cliche. It gets kind of recycled into other movies and TV shows later on.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of the outrage surrounding this movie, at least from people who were in the production side, there was again, people thought it was exploitative and thought it was inappropriate to show. It feels to me like that's just covering up. Like it's, again, the movie itself is a very strange beast.
Yeah.
Because it is presenting you one thing inside the guise of another. And I think the reactions are kind of similar to that, where it's, I think people are pulling the sympathy card, but they're really playing the I don't really want to look at this card.
Yeah, I'm uncomfortable.
Because apparently on the set when they were shooting, some of the actors were so disturbed just by the circus performers that they like had to separate them and keep them in separate parts of the set and stuff.
Jesus. And
when you've got, and I saw, I was reading something, it might have actually been Rob Zombie who pointed this out, who said, like, after this movie, you don't see disabled, for lack of a better term, people in movies for a very long time.
Yeah.
It all gets very homogenized and very slick, and you end up in the era of the movie star. And putting something like this on screen would be absolutely unheard of.
Yeah, well, and historically speaking, and I'm sure David Scull talks about this in the Monster Show. You're in a period historically where you're post World War I. So lots of men have come back from battlefields missing limbs. Yep. And with scars and all sorts of issues from the damage that they took. and they are now living in the world. And other people have to deal with that and don't want to.
Yep.
And you're right, you're in the early 30s, so eugenics is a big deal in the world. And there's a kind of a throwaway line where the gamekeeper or whoever he is, he's bringing the landowning guy out to the park because some of the performers are enjoying the park. And he says, isn't it legal, or he either says, isn't it legal or shouldn't it be legal to drown them?
Yeah.
When they're born like this.
Yeah.
And that is a horrific thing, I think, these days to hear someone say. You're just like, ugh, what an asshole. Like, who would say such a thing? But back then, I think it was fairly common.
It was on the list of things you could do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was like a commonly held belief that at minimum, people who were disabled or different should not be having children.
Right.
That was sort of a minimum assumption for many, many people back then. And so I think even showing, what is it called? The skeleton man and the bearded lady have a baby in this. And I think that also probably triggered a lot of the people watching this movie at the time. Yeah. Saying we barely think they should be allowed to live, let alone reproduce.
Yeah. I think the thing that helps there too is the two that they show having kids, or everybody who they show in a relationship, and especially the ones that show having kids, don't seem like they are mentally impaired. Like they have their thing, but it's not like having this baby is what's the word I'm looking for? Ethically wrong because they can't actually take care of it. You know what I mean?
Sure. I mean, I think from a modern standpoint, that's very true. But I kind of think a big swath of the audience back in 1932 would not have seen an actual. In fact, in a lot of cases, they probably would have been like, it would be better if they were physically able and mentally disabled to let them have kids rather than these people with these physical disabilities. Yeah. Because I think there was the prevailing attitude of just finding it distasteful and abhorrent to have to look at people who did not look the way you expected them to. Yeah.
It's like this movie is so effective in presenting you with something that you find horrific and then but presenting it in a fashion like it's every scene in this movie that features the circus performers. I'm ashamed to say was me going, ugh, and then going, oh.
Yeah.
Like the skeleton guy, when he shows up, it's like, Jesus, how does anybody, oh, he's a dad.
Yeah, he's giving out cigars to his buddies because he's a new father. Oh, that's really sweet.
Yeah, I do think they left one joke on the table that they could have done, though, is when the fight starts, when the bearded, when the half woman, half man got involved.
Joseph and Josephine.
Yeah, they would have been great if Hercules turned her head to the man's side before he punched her.
There were, unfortunately, some very good jokes playing on people's differences in this movie. Like when, God, I'm blanking on his name, but he was the stuttering clown who marries Daisy. And he sees Hans coming out of Cleopatra's caravan and he says, oh, look, she went on a diet.
Yes.
Like they're horrible, horrible jokes, but they're genuinely clever too in a lot of ways. And so it puts you back in that position of I'm looking at this and I'm listening to this and I should feel one way, but I'm feeling a different way.
I mean, even the relationship between that stuttering guy and his wife, who is a Siamese twin.
Yes.
And then the other twin.
Yes, Violet is then engaged to a different man.
Some guy.
Yes.
And he's like, oh, you should come visit us sometime. And then he's like, well, you should come visit us sometime. It does make you think. Like as soon as that happened, I was like, "This. I know this happens in real life. And I don't know how. Well, I mean, I don't know what the arrangement is, but
right. But I think the point of it kind of is that they figure it out. Yeah. They're capable of living a life, and like, when Violet is getting proposed to, Daisy is sitting there reading a book, and like, she obviously can't help but hear and experience some of this, but she doesn't interject. Even when, Violet finally says yes, And the new fiance says, "Oh, Violet," and leans in and kisses her. The sister kind of looks up from her book and kind of smiles in a dreamy way. Like,
well, because she can feel the kiss.
Right, right. But so it's like she can't help it.
Right, yeah.
But she doesn't say anything. She doesn't make any noise. She draws no attention to herself. So it's clear that the two of them have figured out, despite their being conjoined, they have figured out a way to give each other the space and respect to have their own lives.
Yeah.
And I think it's another one of Tod Browning's, like, I'm going to trick you into seeing these people as real people.
Yeah. I think it's unfortunately, Tod Browning had to fall on his own sword in order for this to happen, because this basically ruined his career.
Yeah, which is such a bummer.
Yeah. Going back a little bit to the World War I thing, there's another book I highly recommend called Wasteland by, I don't have it in front of me, I believe the author's name is Scott W. Poole. And it goes into how World War I basically shapes modern horror in the 20th century.
Yeah.
And a big part of it is exactly what you're talking about, the soldiers who have been injured and maimed coming back, and so much of that stuff, so much imagery of lost limbs and amputations works its way into these horror movies. And Tod Browning has two other movies that he did called, one's called The Unholy Three, the other one's called The Unknown, and they both star Lon Chaney. And they're silent films, and they are Lon Chaney movies where he grotesquely deforms his own body to play these roles. So in the Unknown, I believe, which I believe, if I remember correctly, The Unknown got that title because they thought it was a lost movie, and then they found it in a film canister and it just said Unknown on it.
Oh,
so I think that's what it was.
That's cool.
But I can't remember exactly the character what the point of the character is. But he's got no legs, and he walks on wooden legs.
Yeah.
And Chaney actually cinched his legs up.
Oh, Jesus.
In a bent position, and actually walked on these stilts. And in The Unholy Three, I think he plays, that's another circus movie. And I believe he plays someone with no arms. And again, he ratcheted his arms behind him and actually learned how to do the cigarette thing with his feet.
Wow.
Yeah, I believe that's the case. But clearly Tod Browning is interested in that as well.
Yeah.
And I think he presents it in a very visceral kind of way, in ways that some of the other people doing this stuff didn't do. Like, as much as I love Frankenstein, this actual people with actual deformities is unfortunately scary.
Right. Well, because I think even when we have Lon Chaney contorting himself for an effect in a movie, in your brain, well, that's Lon Chaney though.
Yeah.
And he's going to go take those stilts off and need a massage, but his legs are still there. And it plays with our minds, because our brain is always making assumptions. Like, the way we see the world is because our brain is filling in gaps all the time in our vision. And so seeing people who are missing limbs and just never had them, not even I was in a farm equipment accident and I lost my arm. It's like these people just were born this way.
Right.
And so there's not even a connotation or a bit of evidence of, yes, once this person had arms. It's like, nope, she's just never had arms. And I think it hits that uncanny button in our brain that's like, it tells our brain like, oh, wait, what do you mean? That's not how it's supposed to go.
Yeah.
And so it just becomes unsettling whether we like it or not. And the interesting thing about this movie is that it kind of pushes you to start looking beyond that.
Yeah.
Without being preachy about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of the truest things anyone's ever said is that, I think it was Professor Xavier who said, I almost got you. It's people fear what they don't understand.
I don't know why you want me to spit take all over the mic that you own.
And it's directly at me if it happens.
Right, that's true.
Just the satisfaction of getting
I'm going to do a Stephen Colbert style one where I'm really going to project.
But I mean, it's true, right?
Yeah.
Like people are afraid of what they don't understand. I'm sure it's a survival mechanism to some extent. And this movie, I think, does a really good job of tricking you into confronting something you don't understand.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think a part of the reason why this got such a negative reaction, if I had to guess, is because I don't think people knew what to think when they came out. I think they probably had a lot of conflicting things going on.
Yeah.
After watching an hour or so of people just being people and getting used to that, and then getting this horrific sequence at the end.
I wonder if some of them were even able to get used to it.
Yeah.
Or if the shock of seeing it in a theater, in a movie, was so much that... Because wasn't there even a woman who claimed she miscarried because of this movie?
Yes.
Like, it was...
That's publicity you can't buy.
Well, nowadays, yeah, but if it was 1972 this came out, great, but 1932, not so great. I really wonder if people were just so limited and unprepared in what they had learned to expect from film at the time.
Oh, definitely.
That it just was so jarring for them to walk into this and just see the bearded lady giving, not that you see her giving birth, but you see her immediately like post birth, and she's like, yep, this is my daughter. And it's just like, oh, okay. And I think people were just probably so offended at the very idea of the whole thing that I don't even know how many of them probably made it to the end of the movie. Yeah.
And again, this is right in the perfect pocket of that pre-code Hollywood era, where like 5 years later, this movie does not get made at all. Let alone cut, this and even on I was surprised when they do the bit where Hans gives her like a back massage.
Yeah.
I was like, this is pretty explicit for the time.
Yeah, because she like pulls her shirt way down in the back and keeps telling him to go lower.
Moaning and groaning and stuff. Like that's the kind of stuff in pre-code Hollywood where they could get away with that, but then a couple years later, if you're going to be in the bedroom, one person has to have a foot on the ground.
But even looking at, if you went into as an audience member at the time, and this movie came out and you're thinking, ooh, it's the guy who made Dracula. And then you go in and you see this?
Yeah.
Like this is so different. Like you were saying earlier, this one's so much more dynamic and it's thematically so much more complex that I think probably a lot of people were very upset.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is so when MGM decided to cut the movie down, they had already sent prints out to one theater. I can't remember if it was, I forget where it was. So they couldn't cut those. So there was one theater in the country that played the uncut version of Freaks.
Oh, wow.
And it did crazy numbers.
Oh, really?
Lines around the block. They were advertising it as, they only had it to a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
They were advertising it saying like, come in and see Freaks. It's the only place you can see the uncut version of Freaks. And it did really, really well. Everywhere else, total bomb. Complete nothing. So I don't know what that says.
Interesting.
But it makes me really jealous that some people got to see the uncut version.
There were a bunch of people who, wow.
Yeah. And it's, it's one of those things too, where it's like the legend of the lost film is probably at this point better kept in your brain than if you actually saw it.
Yeah.
Because it's not like they did like a close up of Hercules getting his balls cut off or something,
Right. It's not like there was a whole other plot or something that got cut out.
Yeah. I'm sure it was probably intense for the time, but I still think this movie works really well in its current form.
Yeah. Yeah, I do too. As much as I wish we could see that lost footage, I wonder if it isn't one of those things where it's kind of better left unseen in the end, because I can't imagine what you could put back into this that would add substantively to it.
Like the lost 40 minutes of William Friedkin's cruising. Have you ever heard about that?
No.
When when Friedkin was shooting Cruising, he was shooting in these real gay clubs, and so it's amazing to listen to him talk about it on a commentary or something, because he's got this thick Chicago accent, and he's just saying like, "There's 40 minutes of the movie that I cut out. It was all just hardcore gay sex." Apparently, like the first time they showed it, all that stuff was in there.
Oh my God.
And like the producer and his wife watched it, and they came out, and I think the producer just like looked at him and was like, "How dare you?" or something. But anyway, that's neither here nor
Life's
there.
taking notes.
The most important question: is this a horror movie? I think so. I think there's two questions: is this a horror movie? Does this belong on the list? I don't think those answers need to be the same thing.
Really?
Because personally, I don't know if I would call this a horror movie, but I would keep it on the list.
I think historically it's a horror movie.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like the knee-jerk reaction of being so deeply offended and upset by it makes it kind of a horror movie.
Yeah,
even
that's
if
true.
we don't see it that way now. Yeah, I don't know. I think if this came out in more modern times, I don't think I would call it a horror movie. But I think because of the ripple effects it had and like the cultural place it occupies, yeah, I would say it's a horror movie, and it definitely belongs on the list.
Yeah.
Like 100%.
This is apparently Guillermo del Toro's favorite movie, which makes a lot of sense.
I can see that.
Basically, every character that he's ever put in a movie, I think, is based on a character from this movie.
Yeah,
given the same sort of loving approach to the Fishman from whatever the movie,
Hellboy,
Shape of Water.
or Shape of Water,
or Hellboy. Yeah,
he likes fishmen.
Who doesn't?
Me, I don't like fishmen.
You shouldn't.
Yeah, this strikes me as one of those movies that's like your favorite horror director's favorite horror movie, you know?
Yes.
Like the one or two generations back of like everybody going like, yeah, freaks.
This is one of those movies where if I had come to this earlier, like this is the movie where if you're hanging out with people or whatever, they're like, "Oh man, I want to watch some horror movies. What should I watch?" And someone's like, "Oh, Scream. You got to watch Scream." Another person's like, "You got to watch Nightmare on Elm Street." I'd be the person to be like, "Freaks." You ever see Tod Browning's Freaks? And then they would go, "Don't talk to me ever again."
But it's also funny because I feel like if you watched this at the wrong time in your own life, like there's a very fine
Before
line.
my arms grew in.
Before your arms grew in.
Yeah.
But there's a very fine line. Like if you saw this when you were young, this is probably a terrifying movie.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But if you saw this when you were like 17, you'd probably, a lot of 17-year-olds I feel like would probably be like, meh.
Yeah.
That's kind of boring.
Yeah.
I mean, given all the insane shit we can see on the internet nowadays,
Yeah.
I'm sure it seems pretty tame to a lot of people.
I was wondering, because the images of the people from the freak show era have sort of became their own archetype, but they're all real people.
Yep.
But you don't see this stuff anymore. I assume it's still happening, but it's clearly obviously not being monetized.
Yeah.
So like the again, I don't know what the term is, but the misshapen heads and that kind of thing is so specific to freak show imagery.
Yeah.
Like I don't know if I've ever seen that in real life outside in, not that I'm would really have an opportunity to, but it's just, especially again with the internet, you'd feel like you come across it, but
I mean,
maybe it's
I
out
think
there,
you definitely can.
I'm going to the wrong websites,
I think if you
guess.
seek it out, you will find it.
Please don't start sending me videos, Amanda.
My microcephaly people
Or anybody else.
I don't know. That's an interesting question, though. Of like, is it a combination of a lot of people who are born with these conditions? Do we have better assistive devices? Do we have better, treatment of people? Or are they more often institutionalized and kind of removed from public life in a way that they weren't as much back in the 20s, 30s, 40s? Do people not keep their baby? Like, did they have an abortion and not keep the fetus?
That's true. Yeah.
If they find out your baby's going to be born without limbs.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but it could be a combination. It could be something totally different, or it could be just as regular out there in the world. And the only reason it feels like you would see this more often back in the olden days is that there were things like freak shows that would gather these people into a location and then put them out on display rather than leave them like thousands of miles away from one another. Because like I know the cast of this movie was not one traveling carnival. You know, like they're coming from different places. But still, you could tell they're all from like different countries and different areas. So, and that seemed fairly realistic that, you know, you'd have some people who, he's German, she's French, he's American. And so, yeah, they're obviously traveling from far distances to join these groups.
The one thing I do know for a fact about the cast members of this movie that most people won't tell you, they all got the COVID vaccine.
Jesus Christ. Podcast canceled.
I think one thing I did want to mention before we wrap up, putting so much of this movie on ostensibly circus performers, I think could be something that might not work. But Harry Earl's fantastic.
Yeah, he's great.
He's so good.
There's so much pathos with him. Like you empathize so much with everything he says. Feels very loaded and very emotional.
Yeah. And it's even, I mean, you can't even tell that his wife is being played by his sister in this movie.
Yeah. I think they use their genuine affection for one another to great effect.
Yeah. But yeah, I think this is number 39. How do you feel about that placement?
Pretty good.
I think it's pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. This.
Because again, it's not.
Yeah.
I don't think of it as like a scary movie.
Right.
It has its scary moment, but I don't think of it as a scary movie. But I do see how it has like had ripple effects down the line.
One thing I was thinking about as I was watching this and thinking about the reaction to it and how it killed Tod Browning's career.
Poor Tod Browning.
Yeah. 50 years later, David Lynch gets an Academy Award nomination for The Elephant Man.
Yeah.
And that's all movie makeup.
Yep.
And this is ostensibly kind of telling the same story.
Yep.
But with real people.
Yes.
And it killed Tod Browning's career.
Yep.
So
I don't know if that's progress or irony.
Yeah.
Or both.
Who's to say? Not us.
Not us.
Not ignorant McGee over here. Anyway, I think that's going to do it for Tod Browning's Freaks. So originally I had said we were going to do all 5 from the list because we had done all the Evil Dead series. Yes. But we are going to only have one more show before the end of the year. And so we're going to do a Christmas movie, which I feel like we are quickly running out of.
Yeah.
But it occurred to me, there is one that we haven't done that I think is going to be a really fun watch. I watched this a handful of years ago, and I thought it was fantastic. It's called The Advent Calendar.
Okay.
I think it's a French movie.
Oh.
So I believe you can rent it on Amazon. It had been on Shudder for a long time, but
is it just going to be like every day you open a little box and there's a different like body part in it?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then one time it's
Ferrero Rocher.
Yeah. You get to the end, you get through the horror, and you get a nice little treat at the end.
Hey.
But yeah, so we're going to do that. That'll be our last show for the year. And then
I thought you were going to say period. I was like, oh my God, I just lost my job.
And then 2025 will be back with a new... Well, I should say it's our last main feed show.
Yes.
We will also have our final episode of the Halloween coverage on Patreon.
Yes.
So if you want to check that out, head over to patreon.com/thepensky-file. You can listen to that entire coverage. And there will also be a poll up there to decide what we're going to do next year. We're kind of finalizing some choices, and that'll be up pretty soon. But thank you guys for listening. Thank you, Amanda.
Thanks, Clay.
We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for being one of us, Google Gobble.
Google Gobble. We accept you.